Hello, and welcome to The Pouch, the podcast recently voted most unforgettable moment in Australian TV history that helps the average Aussie try and make sense of their current political environment. I'm Greg, probably still would have voted for the drumming gorilla from the Cadbury commercial Savage.
And I'm Jake. Might start a spill motion later, Far Wharton. On today's episode, we give you your Essential as Water weekly roundup of Australian political news, and Greg asks the tough questions.
Jake, this week, while we are snug as a bug, as a rug in the proverbial pouch, I want to know, what is an electorate and why do they keep moving, and does that have to do with the tectonic plates?
Spoiler alert. Maybe. And we also give you a brief history of nearly everything related to the newly elected Greens leader, Adam Bandt. And no, he's not a country singer who has that one song that you might have heard of.
Okay, Jake. Well, we're not even mentioning the PB word this week, so we're just going to leave all of that to the side. Even though there's still little hints and pockets and little moles of stories cropping up, we're just going to leave that for now, I think, because we've had a lot of other things happening this week in the world of politics. You want to start us off? You want to tell us what you think is the most important thing that our listeners need to know this week?
So late last year, the Federal Energy Minister Angus Taylor wrote a letter to the Lord Mayor of Sydney, Clover Moore, who is a long-term critic of the government's inaction on climate change and indeed of Angus Taylor in general. Now, the letter, which was also leaked to News Corp publications, claimed that, for an organisation that was so focused on climate action as the Council of Sydney actually happens to be, they sure seem to have quite a lot spent on international travel, in fact, to the tune of $15 million. Now, when that claim of an international travel budget of $15 million was resoundingly refuted by Clover Moore, who, by the way, produced the actual figures from the council's actual yearly report, which, by the way, is actually contained on the city's on the council's website and freely available to anyone at any time. That actual travel cost amounted to around $1,500. So the thing is that
there was a few zeros added in there somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. A few zeros added to that dollar figure by in inverted commas someone. So Taylor's office was looking around for a document that they were basing that $15 million claim off that mysteriously disappeared. But inevitably, somebody had committed a form of fraud here, and the case was invariably referred to the Australian Federal Police.
Oh, what a mess! This travel thing seems to get a bit out of control, doesn't it? There's so many controversies around politicians and their travel habits, and especially when I don't know the name of him. I'm sure you can help me out, but there was a politician a few weeks ago who got. That's him. He got into a little bit of strife for going overseas.
He had to pay back, I think it was about $5,000 in travel expenses that he claimed that essentially were completely unrelated to, his job.
Yeah, I got a little obsessed with that story because he also. Which country did he go to regularly? It was one of the. Was it like
was Thailand or Indonesia? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it might have been Thailand. He was going there pretty regularly, and he was sort of had to try and justify himself to say, yes, I think that there was a he said, I can't recall that when I was there that I did some ministerial duties, and they said, well, if you can't recall it, mate, you're going to have to pay some of that back. So it was a bit like the PB scandal in that it was so obvious what was happening.
Yeah.
But again, no laws were broken, so just a little slap on the wrist,
just
and
guidelines
away we go.
Weren't followed. That's it.
Yeah. I think he ended up being on the cusp of the guidelines changing or the rules changing or something. So I think he was pretty lucky. Anyway, I got a little bit obsessed with that story. But yeah, so the travel expenses claims are always a bit, iffy, aren't they? Yeah, a memorable one as well as Brom Bishop, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. That one will go down in history as the greatest travel expense claim that probably shouldn't have been claimed. And for listeners playing at home who aren't familiar with that one, Brom Bishop, she was a former deputy leader of the House and a former Abbott government minister rather, and she claimed I think it was around $1 million to fly in a helicopter, in a private helicopter around. It was something like around 100 or 200 kilometres to a fundraiser, to a Liberal Party fundraiser. So not something that really should be claimed. And she went down in a helicopter of flames, you might say. Not literally, just in terms of the scandal. No. But we're getting a little bit off track. But back to this story. This week, the Australian Federal Police announced that it will not pursue the investigation into Energy Minister Angus Taylor and his office after the minister used this allegedly forged document in an extraordinary political attack on not necessarily his political opponent, but an opponent of him politically, Clover Moore.
All right. Well, thank you for that little teaser, Jake. I think that, all over the news this week has been the return to Parliament as well. And, the idea that Scott Morrison was going to be able to use this for his, this was his big comeback. And also, I think people were probably on the edge of their seats waiting to see what Labor dug up. They had weeks and weeks and weeks of ammunition, and everyone was just waiting to see how they were going to fire that ammunition across the aisle there in the House. So talk us through what happened this week when everyone returned back to, quote, work, unquote.
So it is the first week back at Parliament for all of our federal friends and ministers. So following, of course, the tragedies experienced over the summer in that of the fires and, the occasional flood as well, but, the sustained drought and everything that goes along with that. And, of course, the PM's statements that he made in interviews at the National Press Club last week or the week before that hinted to emissions target changes.
That was the comment that our climate policy is going to evolve.
Yes, with the climate, it seems. But yes, it does seem that the tragedies combined with that National Press Club did hint at some unease and tensions in the cabinet and indeed the party room. Most notably, of course, there was that spill motion that was lodged on behalf of Barnaby Joyce in the National Party room. When that spill happened, the Minister for Resources for Water and for North Australia, Matt Carnarvon, left his position in Cabinet in order to support Barnaby. And I wanted to just do a quick little interlude here to let us know that
like a what do you call it? A eulogy?
Intermission? A eulogy, yes. Darren Chester.
A eulogy for backing the wrong horse.
I like it. I like that a lot, yes. So,
And we have the title of the show. Ladies and gentlemen.
A eulogy for backing the wrong horse. I love it. So essentially, there was a cabinet reshuffle after the spill motion that was lodged, and of course after the Senator Bridget McKenzie announced that she would say goodbye to the deputy leader's position following the finding that she breached ministerial standards. So the changes include Keith Pitt, who is taking over Matt Carnarvon's job as Resources Minister, Water Minister, and the Minister for North Australia. You've got David
no
Littleproud.
Pressure there. No pressure, hey? Like that's a big job.
I know, right? Water. I mean, there's a lot that we are girt. Some songs have professed that Australia is girt by water. So in addition to that, you've also got Darren Chester, who's been elevated. His portfolio has been elevated into the cabinet, which is Veterans Affairs and Defence Personnel. There's an upcoming, which is admittedly quite good. There's an upcoming inquiry into veteran suicides. And, the need to reintegrate veterans back into society post. You mould them into a certain thing. There's a need to mould them back into society essentially. After they come
give them
back,
the support they need. Do we know how did the sort of Battleground fare? Do we know, was there a clear winner in Parliament this week? How much money am I getting from Sportsbet for betting on Liberal? Like if I put $50 that Scott Morrison was going to win this week in Parliament, what would I have won? Do you reckon?
I reckon you might not have gone home with the meat tray this week, just because this week was a week really for the opposition to show, essentially to point fingers, to do the job of the opposition, to say, hey, look, we have had a lot going on over the summer, including fires, this continuing drought, the occasional trickling of water that's led to flooding. There's been a massive, toll on both the environment and our ecology, our fauna. There's that figure of 1 billion animals that have died as a result of the fires. So the opposition have spent a lot of time and frankly they've probably kicked a few goals along the way, pushing for action on climate change, but more specifically pointing out that the coalition, the Liberal National Party, have really not a lot in their corner in terms of action on climate change.
Yeah, so you sort of, there's a bit of an easy win this week, I suppose. Do they meet weekly? Like, is it how often do they meet? Is it every day over the week and then they have a bit of a break, or is it like just once a week?
Yeah, they sit daily for a couple of weeks and then they go back to their constituencies and then they come back to Canberra and so it's a regular schedule essentially.
Well, that sounds pretty reasonable. So they go back to their constituents, they get the information from their constituents, they take that to Parliament, They have a big shouty match over things that have nothing to do with that, and then they about the new swimming pool needed in the local zoo or whatever it is, and then they go back to work. Okay, I got that. Yeah. That sounds pretty good.
It's a regular cycle of ebbs and flows.
I do love a good ebb and flow. It sounds like a good name for a breakfast for any of those budding
ebb and flow.
Yeah, cafe owners out there. The ebb and flow. Who knows what the flow bit is in the ebb?
Yeah,
but anyway,
exactly. That's where I was going.
Pay good money for that. Now, Jackie Lambie is back on the radar, and if she ever left, I don't know, but I know I've heard of her before. And then she's the one. She's part of the Jackie Lambie network, isn't she? The network.
Well, not
of
only is she part of it, she's the only member of it. Yes.
Yeah. Great.
Well, the only serving member. I'm sure she has a few employees, but she was originally elected she was originally elected as part of Clive Palmer's Palmer United Party, the PUP Party, back in, I think, 2013, and fell out with Clive within a couple of weeks, which isn't all that surprising. And, and then she forged essentially her own political career. She's been in many ways a standout performer. She's a former veteran as well, and has a lot of experience in reintegrating people back into society. So she has a lot to say about Veterans Affairs, particularly essentially how to integrate back into society, etc. But also she has a colourful history. She's got a son who she admitted in Parliament had an ice addiction, and she was essentially at that point arguing for greater essentially greater funding for what is it called, for rehabilitation facilities for people suffering with drug addiction, particularly ice.
She might be one of those politicians who seems to be pretty easy to write off from the start, but maybe giving her some time and giving her a chance to be heard. Sometimes they can have some great things to say. She's had some things to say about the about a revamp of the donations.
The large political parties do see a tremendous amount of donations, and really they push all, essentially that it looks like all of the money is going to those large political parties. And, as we remarked earlier on in the week when we were talking about Bridget McKenzie and the sports rorts, the interesting thing here is, as we were discussing earlier on in the week, there is this perception in the public, which has been here for a long time. It's nothing new, but this perception is essentially that we have a pay-to-play system. So essentially, the big political donors donate a lot of money in order to gain the ear of the politicians, who should invariably be.
They should be batting for their constituents rather than for the people.
That's exactly what I was trying to say. I was trying to think of a word starts with R. Representing. There we go. Wow, the vocabulary is not there today. But yes, our politicians should be representing the constituents that elected them, not necessarily the big party donors. But the idea here is that there should be, in any democracy, is that there should be a level playing field, that we all have equal access to and equal representation within the parliament by way of the people that we elect.
That sounds very idealistic, Jake. Sounds like you live in a utopia over there in Brisbane, hey?
Well, it is funny, but we do live in a relative utopia in Australia, particularly. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of stuff that we can complain about, right? But in the grand scheme of things, we do have a system that is pretty close to that, in that all political donations over a certain amount must be publicly reported. So I was surprised to find out that amount was $14,000. To be frank, yes, yeah. I mean,
I would have thought I could probably rock up to my local MP and been like, "Hey, I got $200. Yeah, how about I get that swimming pool at the zoo?" And they'd be like, "Oh, $200, that's great. We can get some pamphlets going." But over $14,000, that means that that's like a benchmark.
Yeah, but
people are just going like here's $13,500.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's walking around money, Greg. So that's I don't know about you. No, well, I'm just kidding.
I have an ultra slim wallet. So
somebody's been shopping on Facebook, but
and some tight jeans, yeah.
But look, it is exactly that. So currently, that disclosure amount is set at $13,800 per year, and what Jackie Lambie is asking for. In a private senator's bill that she is going to put forward this week, is to have that amount reduced from $13,800 a year to $2,500 for every 6 months. It's interesting. So when you go over the figures, the AEC, the Australian Electoral Commission, revealed that the Liberals had collected a total of $165 million in the financial year ending June 2018, of which $22.6 million was donated above that threshold amount of $13,800.
Right.
Comparably, Labor received $126 million, of which $18.2 million was donated above that threshold. So essentially, Lambie's saying that, quote, the problem is when you can give a donation under $14,000, you can give that every day for 7 days and you don't have to write any of that down.
Yeah. So, but does that? I suppose that. In my mind, it would make sense that if it's $14,000 over a certain amount from the same person over any given time. But what she's saying is that I can donate $13,500 this week, donate another $13,500 next week, and it doesn't have to be written down. But does it have to be written down if it's from the same person?
Well, that's the thing. So yes, but quite often they'll be broken up. There are all sorts of ways. that people use to get around these, to create loopholes essentially in this system. And you just call out one of you've just called out one of them. So, yes, while
I'm smart like that. I'm very good like that.
Getting to the crux of it. So when you boil it down, while it is posited that there's about $62 million, the AEC, Australian Electoral Commission, has stated that there's around $62 million of, for want of a better term, black market money that's really unaccountable to, particular sources that is flowing to, the big two political parties. That there's not there's probably a lot of a thought that there's probably not a whole lot that can be done about that, whether you restrict the laws in one way or another, because essentially, we have this system whereby somebody can donate money. And that money can go into, organising a fundraiser that is used to garner more money. And political donations gained at fundraisers, including the ticket pricing, and I don't know if you've ever, read about these ones, but some of them can have like $10,000 or $50,000 a head tickets to sit down with the Prime Minister or sit down with your Premier or, whatever it happens to be.
So that's not considered a donation, is that right?
It's not considered a donation, that's right.
Cha-ching.
Yeah, exactly. So there's all these sorts of loopholes to get around the system, and I would certainly suggest that Jackie Lambie is representing her constituency rather well in raising an issue like that, particularly in the wake of the PB scandal, which did go to show that if you're in a marginal electorate or you're best mates with the local MP, there's a good chance that you'll get a hold of grant money.
Well, Jake, I'm glad you brought up marginal electorates because I'm curious to know about electorates themselves. I guess one of the things that keeps me guessing is the fact that they sometimes change, right? So sometimes an electorate can be this big, sometimes an electorate can be yay big and then nay big, and everyone's up in arms about who's going to get the vote this year because of where the electorate is. I'm curious to know why they change, how they change, what an electorate is. You can so start at the top. What is an electorate? Or at the very least, I know that they're called seats.
Yes, they are. Do you know why they're called seats?
I'm going to guess it's because when you win if you're the MP of that electorate, you get yourself a seat in Parliament.
No, actually, there are actual seats. There are literal seats around the country that are positioned inside electorates.
That's not true.
No, it is true, and prior
that is not true.
No, prior to the current electoral system, what used to happen is that people would fight to the death in order to sit on that seat, and if they won, they were elected to Parliament. That's the dystopian version of the electoral system.
All right, well, you had me there for 2 seconds.
So yes, the electorates in Australia. You are of course correct. Yes. You do get a seat in Parliament, and that's
ding, ding,
why
ding.
it's referred to as a seat. Ding, ding, ding. So yes,
this is why I get invited onto the iFriends podcast, because I'm so good at answering these.
General knowledge, absolutely. Yeah. So yes, electorates in Australia are geographically defined areas represented by a single elected member of Parliament, or MP. Now, in most cases, there will be different electoral boundaries for councils, for states, and indeed for federal elections, which is sort of more where we're going in this conversation. Now, on top of that as well, each state and territory also has a number of senators that are proportioned essentially to the total number of people in that state or territory.
Right.
But so look, in the grand scheme of things, you ask, do boundaries or do electorates change? Absolutely, they do. And essentially what happens is, towns grow. cities grow, and of course they shrink as well. But when there is a real or perceived imbalance, and I'll get back to perceived imbalance in a little bit, but when there is a real imbalance, a thing called a malapportionment is declared, and the electoral boundaries are updated, and people will be moved to new electorates, essentially. So when this happens, a redistribution committee is formed, specifically with the intent to reapportion people based on the division of population, and they'll do that sort of on a federal basis within the Australian Electoral Commission. The redistribution committee is responsible for considering inputs from interested individuals and organisations, and for developing a proposed redistribution that's agreed essentially at a state and territory level. They've got to consider a few really interesting things, though. They've got to consider things like the economics of an area. Is this area booming, and we're putting them into, we're putting this new area into that's also booming into an already booming place, therefore making it a super boomy place.
Oh, right, a double boom, the classic double boomer. There's another sandwich for our potential cafe. The double boomer.
The double boomer. I like it.
You can have the ebb and flow and the double boomer. Thanks.
The ebb and flow and the double boom. I love it. I'm getting really hungry now, Greg. But
have a triple boomer.
The intention of all this stuff is essentially to balance things out. So you don't want to put too many, really booming places together, because essentially that invariably leaves a whole bunch of places that aren't booming together. So the idea is to balance things out as much as possible. So I mentioned economic things. There's also social considerations, infrastructure interests and considerations. But really, again, that it's all done in an attempt to balance things out. Now, there is another term that's synonymous with electoral redistribution, not so much in Australia.
Party.
But this is
Party.
You're very close. It's gerrymandering, which is a very, very dirty word.
It sounds like old man underwear, doesn't it? Grab my gerrymanders, would you love?
But so there is this term called gerrymandering, which essentially is when when electoral boundaries are redrawn in order to favour one political party or one group over other groups. And that sort of goes back to that term, that premise of, the double boomers, the double boomer electorates.
So is that done deliberately? So gerrymandering is okay?
Well, no, gerrymandering is absolutely not okay. And and it's not acceptable. And essentially, when you get these committees together, those committees are there to ensure that gerrymandering does not happen. Gerrymandering has absolutely happened in the past, and
I bet it has.
It absolutely has. Quite
I'm doing
a while
it right
ago
now.
in Queensland. I'm doing it right now. I feel like a gerrymander really badly. But also, South Australia is known for it. Western Australia is known for it. There was a little bit in Queensland in the Bjelke-Petersen era, but look, there hasn't been too much of it in the recent past that has been, I would say, conspicuous. There's essentially any time you get a group of people together, group of bureaucrats together to, decide on something, they're going to do it based on terms of reference, etc. And they're always open for interpretation. So you're never 100% sure, but certainly it looks like in Australia we don't have such a big of a problem compared with other international jurisdictions.
Nothing worse than some sneaky gerrymandering. I think that one of the things that I read, it said that it's limited to about 100,000 people. Is that right?
Around
in the electorate, about 100,000 people is the limit for your electorate, which explains why some of those electorates are so huge up in Queensland. Yeah, you've got these massive electorates that are so huge, and then down here, you've got one in Victoria called, I know it's Bateman, but no one calls it Bateman, do they? It's Batman. You've got Batman down in Victoria. So there's smaller ones like that because the population is so dense, whereas the larger ones up in Queensland and stuff so huge. Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, so it is really all about trying to find balance, but yes, trying to base it absolutely on an ideal number of people of around 100,000 plus or minus 10%.
And now it's time for Who in the World is Adam Bandt. So this week, Jake, we had a few shake-ups. We had the national shake-up, and now we've got the Greens shake-up, which again sounds like you can have that at your cafe as well.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to sound so tasty though. Green shake-up?
No, yeah, the Greens shake-up. I don't know. Anyway. Hey,
yeah,
my job isn't to make it taste good, okay? I'm just the marketing guy, all right? They can do the rest.
I'm just here to come up with the names, guys.
That's right. Again, you don't work here. Now, so the Greens have had a shake-up. Adam Bandt has taken the reins of the Greens party.
You talked about reins. Reins are traditionally made from leather, and leather is not vegan, so it's probably unlikely that the Greens would support taking the reins.
So he's taken the organic rope. He's taken the organic rope of the Greens. Well, he's come out swinging, hasn't he? He's come out swinging with this Green New Deal, which is copyrighted by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in America. She was the one who came up with this one. You can't go around just calling everything a Green New Deal.
No, exactly. I did think that was a little bit of an homage to Ocasio-Cortez in the US, and a little bit of a nod to the waves of support, particularly around the younger portions of America that supported her election. But look, as you say, Adam Bandt has taken the patchouli scented candle of the Greens Party, which does mean that he is now the leader of the party, and will be replacing Richard Di Natale, who announced earlier on in the week, in the very wee hours of February 3rd, the first sitting day of Parliament, that he would be both stepping down from the Greens leadership and the party in general, or in total rather, stating that essentially he didn't have it in him to continue on with his Senate term. I think he had about another 3 years left, and he wants to change the leadership now and go back to spending a little bit more time with his children and support his wife in her career. So yes.
Who is Adam? Who's Adam Bandt? Tell me why I should like him.
Well,
because my default is generally not to like anyone. So what's the default? Change my mind.
I will do my best. But I suppose he's the fourth leader of the Greens since their formation a few times ago. He is a fair choice, I would say, but he is different to the party's previous leaders. For example, Bob Brown and Christine Milne, they both emerged from the Tasmanian Greens activism arm of the party, and Di Natale was a unifying centrist voice coming from a background of medicine. He was a GP and from public health. But Bandt was elected to the division of Melbourne in the House of Representatives, the lower house of Parliament in Australia, in 2010. He's been a member of the party really only since just before then in 2008, but prior to that he was a member of the Labor Party, particularly in university. He was a member of the Left Alliance.
Yeah,
and actually, while he was a student in university, he referred to the Greens as the bourgeois, writing that communists can't fetishize alternative political parties, but should always make some kind of materially based assessment about the effectiveness of any given strategy come election time. Which I think
that's something is that bourgeoisie. I think
bourgeoisie.
Bourgeoisie. I'd have to unpack that. I don't know what that sentence means, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that on air. That one can be for our Patreon subscribers, which don't exist because we don't have a Patreon.
That's true.
So you can imagine me doing that for free. You can imagine me doing that for free.
Yeah. So Greg, tell me what the bourgeoisie is and how they have changed history.
How does it? I will tell you that.
So, yes, prior to his election to Parliament in 2010, Bandt lived in Victorian Parkville, a little place called Parkville, and he worked as an industrial and public interest lawyer. He was a partner in the very Labor Union lawyer firm Slater and Gordon. He was a partner there. He's thought by many who aren't on his side of politics to be, which by the way is quite a few people, to be quite radical and extreme, which, two terms that aren't really used so much outside of a skate park. But to give you sort of an example, he tweeted 2 weeks ago, quote, "Scott Morrison is a threat to life. We must rise up against this terrible government with a fury that matches the intensity of these terrible fires."
Goodness me. I've been wasting my time.
They're big words. They're very big words from a very small party, I would say.
Them's fighting words, yeah.
So upon taking leadership this week, Bandt immediately announced that the Greens would campaign, as you said, on a platform of a, quote, Green New Deal. And the idea here is to rebrand policies to include things like dental care within Medicare, which is a big platform for particularly the disenfranchised and those living with poverty across Australia.
I'm all for that, Jake, but how does that change the environment? How is that part of the...
That's the Greens have always been a part. I suppose this is a political strategy, because remembering that the last leader of the Greens was Richard Di Natale, who again has a public health background, and of course he was a doctor as well. So this could be Adam Bandt realizing that hey, the last guy did have a particular bent on strengthening Medicare. So we need to think about this. But the other side of that is that the Greens have always been a political powerhouse in terms of things like social welfare policies. So they've always strenuously campaigned for a rise in welfare. They've always strenuously campaigned for things like public housing. They've campaigned for strengthening things like Medicare. So that they have always been this social justice and I suppose looking out for the little guys, looking out for the so-called quiet Australians that other political parties claim to speak for as well. But it is, it's an interesting one. He is an interesting choice. He's probably one of, of probably 3 or 4 really good choices. Because you've also got Sarah Hanson-Young, political powerhouse.
Larissa Waters.
Larissa Waters.
I've got a friend who worked for Larissa Waters for a while. Hey, Dom.
Oh, yeah, I remember Dom, actually. I met him.
Yeah, we went down to Melbourne together.
Yeah, absolutely. Larissa Waters, great person. Yeah. There are a number of really strong, really strong voices, I suppose, for progressive change in the Greens. So we'll just have to see what happens here. Particularly, I mean, the announcement of that Bandt made about dental care in Medicare. He wants to make education free for particularly. He wants to abolish things like public school fees. He wants to phase out all fossil fuel extraction in favour of an advanced mining and manufacturing sector powered by renewable energy.
Yeah,
and ultimately
little things, a few small changes.
Little things, exactly.
Yeah.
And what the interesting thing here is that he did say that he wants to, essentially through the next election, he wants to hold the balance of power in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and how aligned with reality that actually is, only time will ultimately tell.
Well, Jake, thank you so much for chatting to me today about the new week in Parliament, about some of the changes that are being proposed, for changes to donations to the government, for chatting to me about Adam Bandt especially. Gosh, I feel like I know him like the back of my hand.
And do you like the back of your hand?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, okay, well that's good.
I wouldn't not want to have it.
You wouldn't like to have the back of your hand surgically removed.
No, that's right. So, I'm happy with that. I'm sure he's happy with that.
I'm sure he is. I'm sure he absolutely is. But thanks very much, Greg. I really appreciate that. And thanks very much to our listeners for listening and for giving me a reason to research all of these fun topics. Of course, if you enjoyed the show, why don't you hit subscribe and follow us on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook by searching for The Pouch, the podcast.
And thank you to everyone, because we reached 1,000 downloads this week, and that just warms the cockles, doesn't it? And I might have an ebb and flow to celebrate.
I'm gonna have a double boomer.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Yeah, follow with a chaser of a greens shake-up. And so thank you very much. It really is a joy to do this podcast. And so if you'd like to share that joy, if you'd love to share the love, you can just tell a friend, hey, you should check out thepouchthepodcast.com, because then you can choose your own favorite podcast player and listen to Greg and Jake talk about politics every week. And sometimes, if it's really interesting, twice a week. You can do that from there. And thank you so much, Jake. And I look forward to chatting with you again next week.
You said it in your radio voice, so I didn't understand.
Yeah, that's just how I talk now.
And so
when I say goodbye to people at work now, it's like, look, thanks so much. I really appreciate everything you've done for me today. I really love the way that you brought out my lunch for me and that you let me sit down next to you. I really look forward to speaking to you again tomorrow.
And what do they say?
You don't work here.
Oh, love it.